What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to talk through my top 30 wide receiver rankings to make sure that you guys are ready to go for these home league drafts coming up this weekend. So with all that being said, let's don't waste any time. If you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. She gon' let me.
Now, a couple of notes before we get into this. First of all, we're going to put these in tiers. I feel much strongly about where the tier breaks are than I do about wide receiver A versus wide receiver B within each tier. You can rearrange them within each tier however you like, but I feel pretty confident these are where the tier breaks are at. Now, these are all going to be skewed towards half PPR and full PPR leagues. And if you want the complete rankings, make sure you check out patreon.com/RonStewart. I have my top 200 rankings for half PPR and full PPR leagues. It's a checklist that I bring in with me to every single home league draft, high stakes draft that I'm doing myself. I have every single player listed there, their target rounds, where I'm trying to draft them, my targets, my avoids. They're all outlined there. They're all tiered. It's the perfect cheat sheet that you need to dominate your home league. So with that being said, let's get into it, shall we, fellas? We have, first of all, our top tier, which is my 101 and my 102. These guys are my undisputed top two picks, half PPR, full PPR. If it's standard, then you can sort of skew running back there. But Jefferson and Chase are going to hop up into this top tier. Now, we're not going to spend a ton of time on these guys. We do have 30 wide receivers to get into, but make sure that you guys appreciate Justin Jefferson for what we have them for. You know, like, these are two guys that, going back to the merger, like 1970, points per game in a wide receiver's first 3 seasons. Now, remember, Jamar Chase still has a season to go to move up this list, but it's OBJ, Jefferson, Randy Moss, Jamar Chase, Jerry Rice as your 18-plus point per game wide receivers through the first 3 years. Both of these guys are in offenses where they have decent quarterback. Well, Kirk Cousins, decent quarterback. Joe Burrow, great quarterback. Both of these offenses were top 10 in pass attempts last year, top 10 in scoring. Now, you could say a guy like Cooper Kupp maybe has a higher week 1 projection than maybe both of these guys, but their floor is just so high as guys that are still ascending early on in their career. We can expect them to stay healthier, not get hurt. The downside here is nothing, and then the upside is nuclear year 3, year 4 from either of these guys. So they have really high floors, really high ceilings. These are guys, again, my locked and loaded tier 1 4 wide receivers. Now, next up, we have our 20-plus point per game wide receivers. So these are really high-end wide receiver ones, guys that have a ton of upside. And first up, we have Tyreek Hill as our wide receiver 3 here. Of course, you can argue for a guy to be wide receiver 1 overall. It's really just the floor here where you sort of, I mean, you're not dependent on Tua, but Tua needs to stay healthy for Tyreek Hill to be that guy. Last year, in games where Tua played start to finish, Tyreek Hill had 22.5 points per game, which would have been the highest point per game running back or wide receiver across all of fantasy football last year. So that's really impressive. The issue is that you need Tua to hold up over an entire season. He hasn't done that yet. But I will say Mike White should be an upgrade over like the Teddy Bridgewater, Skylar Thompson experience from last year. So the floor is a little bit higher. But then you also have the downside of him being another year into his career. Tyreek Hill's trump card is his speed. If that sort of comes away, then that's an issue as well. These are all like, we're splitting hairs here. Like, Tyreek Hill's literally my 103 in redraft leagues, but I'm just trying to say why he's not in that first year. But then we have Cooper Kupp as our wide receiver 4. And he's a guy who I think that people are sort of sleeping on how crazy he was last year. Like, yes, he had a very dominant 2021, but 2022, he was also insane. He had 24.8 points per game, which, again, would have outscored the RB1 and wide receiver 1 overall last year by like a full 2 to 3 points per game. And until he got hurt, like, this is insane. Like, he never finished outside of the top 24 wide receivers. He had 2 30-plus point games. He only went under 20 points in 2 of those first, like, 8 games. Like, it's insane. Only 2 of those games did he go below 20 PPR points. He's never finished lower than wide receiver 22 last year. Just insane. But what it comes down to is really the floor for Cooper Kupp, which sounds weird for a guy that, like, in years past, we're like, oh, he's a PPR guy. He has a super high floor. But the issue comes down to health for him and Matthew Stafford. If Matthew Stafford, like, isn't good to go and they have to go to their backup QB and this offense gets rough, that's sort of scary for Cooper Kupp. But if Matthew Stafford can stay healthy, Cooper Kupp should be all right. I know that there is a little bit of an issue here where people are scared off by his hamstring strain. But this is Deepak Chona. He is like a Harvard surgeon, something like that. And he has like a model for injury recovery, production hits, all of that stuff. And he said Cooper Kupp returning this week. So he is returning to practice this week, which is good, which means that his hamstring strain was probably like grade 1, which means it's pretty minor. He said, which means low re-injury risk, about 10%, no production hit by week 1. So to me, I'm still drafting him top 5. I know I've gotten comments in the past that have been like, oh, like, what are we doing about Cooper Kupp? Especially in home leagues when he's like slipping, like, fellas, if you can get Cooper Kupp 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, anything like that in your home league, scoop him up. Again, I don't think that the injury is going to be that big of a concern for him. Again, it seems to be a very minimal issue. Now, moving on to our next tier here, we have our wide receiver 1. So these are just guys that you draft, you put in your wide receiver 1 spot, and you feel good about them, right? Like, these aren't guys that are like these like mega stars, but guys who could, get into these top tiers here. And first up, we have Stephon Diggs as our wide receiver 5. He just feels really safe, where he is a talented wide receiver. He is the wide receiver 1 in an offense with Josh Allen, and that's really all you need. Josh Allen is a guy who, since 2020, since Diggs came there, this passing offense has been top 5 in pass attempts per game and passing yards per game. We want the number 1 guy in a passing offense like that, and in that span since 2020, Stephon Diggs has been the wide receiver 6, wide receiver 9, and the wide receiver 3 in points per game. So having at the wide receiver 5 here sounds about right. The number 1 wide receiver attached to Josh Allen should be a priority. Now, after that, at wide receiver 6, we have CeeDee Lamb, who is a talented wide receiver heading into year 4. Last year, people don't really understand that CeeDee Lamb was kind of a stud down the stretch last year. Dak Prescott returns from injury in week 7. From week 7 on, CeeDee Lamb had 19.5 points per game as the wide receiver 3 in points per game from that span, which is really impressive. Now, the thing that people are a little bit concerned about is the Cowboys fire Kellen Moore, and Mike McCarthy is going to be calling plays, or at least have a really big role in sort of creating the offense and creating the game plan. But I think that people don't understand that Mike McCarthy is actually pretty pass heavy, where last year the Cowboys were actually a little run heavy. They were 19th in pass attempts per game. And if we go back to McCarthy's time in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, he was actually very pass heavy. Now, of course, this is with Aaron Rodgers, but to me, Dak Prescott, of course, not the same level as Aaron Rodgers, but he's very much a capable quarterback of maintaining a high pass volume offense. So you're not going to go away from the passing game because you have Dak Prescott as your quarterback. And this is a Denny McCarthy tweet. Denny McCarthy does great work. And he said McCarthy's Packers offenses were some of the most pass-first units in the NFL during Aaron Rodgers' heyday. From 2010 to 2018, when McCarthy was fired, as his West Coast offense curdled into a painfully predictable mess of a system, no team had a higher early down pass rate than the Packers. Green Bay led the NFL in pass rate over expected during that 9-year stretch. In fact, McCarthy's Packers were well over their expected pass rate in every down and distance. In short, McCarthy established the pass in Green Bay. Now, Denny's a funny writer. That's why he said, like, curdled, whatever that was, predictable mess of a system. But you can see here, over that entire stretch, the Packers had the highest neutral pass rate in the NFL. And then the Cowboys come out here this year, this Mike McCarthy sort of offense, if you want to call it, and they let Zeke walk. They don't add another running back to Tony Pollard in that backfield. And then they go out and they get Brandon Cooks. So to me, the signals that they're going to pass the ball in Dallas. And if CeeDee Lamb's going to be the number 1 target on a Dak Prescott passing offense that should be like top 10 in pass attempts, they should be able to score the ball well. That's really interesting. As a guy that, again, down the stretch was like almost a 20-point per game wide receiver. Moving on, we have our wide receiver 7 here, which is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god. And I keep trying to move him up. Right now, he's my 111 in the rankings. And he's a guy that I think could lead the NFL in receptions and be just an absolute monster. Like in full PPR, Amon-Ra St. Brown, to me, is a very clear first-round pick. Now, last year, he had 2 really good games, and he gets hurt in week 3. And he works back from injury, doesn't really play a full portion of snaps until his second or third game back. But if we just look at games where he played in 60% or more of the snaps, this is a guy who was at the wide receiver 8. I think that he's tied for wide receiver 8 with Christian Watson there, 18.6 points per game. That's really, really strong stuff. And this was a guy last year who, in terms of target per out run and yards per out run, was identical to Cooper Kupp. He had 28% targets per out run, 2.4 yards per out run. Those are both elite numbers. Again, identical to what Cooper Kupp did in 2022 in terms of peripherals. Cooper Kupp just had more touchdowns is really the only difference there. Top 10 marks for targets per out run and yards per out run. If he takes another step forward here in year 3, which we can kind of expect from wide receivers, And if Jared Goff, I mean, there's no Jameson Williams now. Your next best passing game options are rookies and Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta, who we love, by the way. But Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be the number one target on this team. Jared Goff has supported Cooper Kupp before. To me, Amon-Ra St. Brown wheels all the way up. Then we have Davante Adams as our wide receiver 8, who is getting... The disrespect on Davante Adams has to stop. It has to stop. This is his 5th straight top 6 point per game season that Davante Adams is coming off here. And reception perception, which is a really cool way to sort of chart wide receivers and see how well they do. This is a Matt Harmon joint, if you will, receptionperception.com. And they kind of chart your win rate against man, zone on each individual route. And Davante Adams was very much that dude last year. 90th percentile across the board. Matt Harmon said, Adams posted success rate versus man coverage scores of 79.5%, 78%, 79.5%, 79.6% in his final 4 years with the Packers, and checked right in that range with a 78.1% with the 2022 Raiders. In terms of his success rate versus man, he posted the second best success rate versus press coverage of his career and was once again excellent against zones. He is one of the 2 or 3 best route runners in the NFL and can really only be ranked among guys like Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson in this section of the game. He has not slowed down at all. He's still very much in his prime. He was a stud last year, and I'm not all that concerned about them going from Derek Carr to Jimmy G. Last year, Derek Carr was like awful. Jacob Sanderson kind of points it out here, but if you look at Jimmy G's career numbers and you compare it to Derek Carr's last year, like Jimmy G blows him out of the water in completion percentage, yards per attempt, touchdown percentage about the same, PFF grade about the same, like EPA per play, Jimmy Garoppolo beats him there, completion percentage over expectation, Jimmy Garoppolo beats him there as well. Now, this isn't to say that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to come in here and perform at his career average, because of course he was in that Kyle Shanahan offense, but it's not some massive downgrade from Derek Carr. Derek Carr was awful last year. Now, of course, Derek Carr could bounce back in New Orleans, whatever, but Derek Carr played pretty poorly last year, and it didn't matter for Davante Adams. He is still very much every bit of the guy that we know Davante Adams to be, and anywhere that he's in the second round, he's an absolute must-draft for me. Now, our wide receiver 9 here is Arthur Juan Brown, A.J. Brown, and it's so tough for me with A.J. Brown because I want to be high on him. We were all over him last year. We had him a ton because he was going at like the early third last year. The issue is that the bet's the same, and now we're paying late first prices. And that's where it gets tough. I think that he's truly one of the most talented wide receivers in the league. If you ask me in a vacuum, who's the best wide receivers on this list, I would put him probably first in this tier. Or I'd put Davante Adams first in this tier, then maybe Diggs, then probably A.J. Brown over Amon-Ra St. Brown and CeeDee Lamb. But it's tough. Like, this is a guy, again, very talented, super efficient as well. He has had over a 2.5 yards per route run every year of his career. He averages 2.6 yards per route run over his entire career, which last year, Jefferson and Tyreek Hill were the only guys over 2.6 yards per route run. That is A.J. Brown's career average, 2.6 yards per route run, which is like a top 3 number in most years. So he is the most, on a per route basis, A.J. Brown is a dog. He is insane. He's incredible. But the issue is, the Eagles were 10th lowest in pass attempts per game last year. This is a team that when they get in close to the goal line, they're going to run the ball with Jalen Hurts. So it gets tough. Like, the touchdown upside's a little bit lower. The passing volume upside's a little bit lower. Devonta Smith's still coming on behind him as well. So it's just like his ceiling's just a little bit capped. Where this is a guy, I don't think that he's finished as a top 5 point per game wide receiver just yet. Or if he has, he's like just been a fringe. Like, if I'm drafting a wide receiver in the late first, I want a path to wide receiver 1 overall upside. And it gets tough with A.J. Brown. And again, it's not a talent thing. It's really just more of what this offense does and how it operates. Now, maybe he's just that talented that he can still get to 20 plus points per game, and it's why we're not completely fading A.J. Brown, but we have him lower than maybe some ADPs out there. But he's still very good. I'm fine with him anywhere in the early second, but I do know in some leagues that he'll go at like the 110, 109, and I can't quite get there. Now, our last wide receiver in this tier, our wide receiver 10, is Garrett Wilson. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I think that there's really a case to move Garrett Wilson as high as like right here, and I want to do it so bad, but I'm keeping myself constrained, and we'll put Garrett Wilson there for now, but you could really talk me into it. This is a guy, elite wide receiver prospect, top 10 pick in the NFL. He comes in, and people don't really understand, like the splits between him playing with Zach Wilson and not playing with Zach Wilson are insane. And that's not even to say that the QBs, so this is with and without Zach Wilson. With Zach Wilson, 8.8 points per game, which is brutal. Without Zach Wilson, though, and this is the crazy part, it's not like it was Zach Wilson and some really good quarterback. It was Zach Wilson, and then the out of split side is like Mike White, Joe Flacco, and Chris Streveler. Those were the other 3 quarterbacks that he had 17.3 points per game with. That would have been the wide receiver 9 in points per game last year, and he was just a true rookie on a bad Jets passing offense. Now we know year 1 wide receivers take big steps in year 2. He's going to take a step into year 2, and now he goes from Zach Wilson to one of the league's best quarterbacks with Aaron Rodgers. There's clear top 5 upside here, and the most important thing to understand with these Green Bay offenses, Nathaniel Hackett is following Aaron Rodgers. Nathaniel Hackett was with Aaron Rodgers 2019 through 2021, and in those years, they ranked 1st, 4th, and 7th in pass rate over expectation in the red zone. This is a scheme that sets up Aaron Rodgers where he has the ability to kind of like call off the play and like tell Garrett Wilson, like, run in motion, like, you're going to cook this guy. And then like that's pretty much what you saw against the Giants, where Josh Norris had a really good tweet where he kind of showed it. Like, Aaron Rodgers, I do think that he sort of killed the play at line of scrimmage, and him and Garrett Wilson were just communicating, and instead of like a sort of a drag route out into the flat, or like kind of like a little bit of a screen, he kind of sent him on a fade down into the end zone, and he just threw him over the top. There's going to be a lot of that this year, where Aaron Rodgers gets a look that he likes, he looks off to Garrett Wilson, he sends him into the end zone, and it's something you saw with Devontae Adams a lot, where Nathaniel Hackett would get him in motion and sort of get some things going. Even though like Aaron Jones was a guy who scored a lot of touchdowns, even then, again, every year that Nathaniel Hackett was in Green Bay, top 7 in pass rate over expectation in the red zone. That's where the upside is for Garrett Wilson. Like, he could legitimately challenge for the league lead in receiving touchdowns just because of how this offense operates and because of how Aaron Rodgers kind of sees the game. Now, you can say, Aaron Rodgers is washed or whatever. Aaron Rodgers has one of the best touchdown percentages in the NFL. So even on like a low amount of pass attempts, he's still going to challenge for like 30-plus passing touchdowns. And in this offense, like, outside of Garrett Wilson, who's going to catch double-digit passing touchdowns? Nobody. It's Garrett Wilson. He's going to be a really big beneficiary of Rodgers. He's going to be a really big option in the red zone. And then just on top of that, great route runner, great receiver. He had the second most missed tackles forced last year among wide receivers, behind just Deebo Samuel. So he just has all of these things going for him. He's an elite route runner. He gets targets. He made it work with bad QBs last year. And he has this trump card on top of that where he's just like this crazy in-space tackle breaker. So Garrett Wilson has all the upside in the world. If you want to move him inside of your top 5 or your top 6 wide receivers, I give you full permission to, if you have the balls to do it. Now, moving on, wide receiver 11. We have Chris Olave here. Now, he is the first wide receiver in a tier called borderline wide receiver ones. These are guys that you can draft as your wide receiver 1, but they're like fringy wide receiver ones. They're low-end wide receiver ones, which is fine. But Chris Olave, stud wide receiver. He played with Garrett Wilson at Ohio State. Last year, he was 8th in yards per route run and 6th in targets per route run as a rookie. That's really impressive to be that good on a per route basis in your first year. Now, the thing that's really important about him, targets per run, he was at 26.5%. 26.5% of his routes he's getting targeted. And not only that, he had the 9th highest ADOT. So going 14.9 average up the target downfield, which is what his ADOT is absolutely bonkers. To go 15 yards on the field and then still demand a target on 26.5% of those routes, where a lot of the times you're downfield. Pretty much your ADOT and your target share have like a negative relationship together, right? The further you are downfield, the less likely a QB is to throw it to you. It's just kind of how it works. But Chris Olave completely defies that. So for a guy that I thought had minimal upside probably like a few months ago, I looked back into it. I think that he has all the upside in the world, where he's not like Garrett Wilson, where he's not going to break tackles. He is a possession guy after the catch. But if he's going to command that type of volume downfield, he's going to get the efficiency before the catch instead of after it, if that makes sense, which is really good. I will say the only holdup here is I don't love the offense. This passing was actually pretty good last year with Andy Dalton. They were like top 10 in yards per attempt. They were slow. They were 4th in neutral pace last year, 7th lowest pass attempts. That possibly changes with Derek Carr, though. Mike Clay has them projected for 21st in pass attempts, which is more than fine. Like, you just need them to be around league average. And Chris Olave will be just fine. Now, our next 3 wide receivers, we're going to bunch together. I feel similarly about all 3 of these guys. All of them have in common where Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 2 behind Tyreek Hill, T. Higgins, wide receiver 2 behind Jamar Chase, and then Devonta Smith, wide receiver 2 behind A.J. Brown. And it's tough. Like, on Underdog, these guys go in the second round. In your home league, they're probably more. I mean, Waddle, you're going to have to take in the second, but T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, you can get probably in the third round in your home league. Third round, they're fine. I just, again, like, when I take a guy in the second round, I want to have league-winning upside. And I do find it difficult to see these guys having league-winning upside without an injury in front of them. Again, all of them kind of hovered around 15 points per game last year as, like, fringe wide receiver 1s. And if you draft a wide receiver in the second round who gives you 15 points per game, you're not going to have a good time. But again, in the third round, I'm fine with any of these guys. Really, what the calculus is here is we looked at league-winning wide receiver seasons, 20-plus point per game seasons a few weeks ago, and 90% of your 20-plus point per game seasons were wide receivers drafted as the wide receiver 1 in their own offense, and no team has ever had two 20-plus point per game wide receivers in a given season since 2010. And for my money, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown, all much more likely to have 20-plus point per game seasons than their counterparts here. Like, now, maybe these guys are like kind of handcuffs in a way where if the starter goes down, then maybe they have that 20-plus point per game upside, but I don't want to draft a wide receiver whose path to upside hinges on an injury in round 2. Like, again, they're not complete fates for me. They're just not guys I'm crazy about drafting where they go right now. They feel kind of like, again, like luxury wide receiver 2s that I don't really see a huge difference between these 3 and the wide receivers we're going to talk about in this next tier. Now, I do prefer Waddle and T just because they're on pass-first offenses, whereas Devonta Smith's going to be on a more run-first offense. But you can have them ordered however you'd like. Again, they're not complete fates for me. They're just not guys that I'm crazy about this year just because it feels like the price has really caught up with them. Now, we do have one more wide receiver in this tier, actually. I almost forgot about it, but we have Calvin Ridley. Now, there's definitely a lot more risk with Calvin Ridley than there is these other 4 guys, but there's also a lot of upside with Calvin Ridley as well, where he is the number 1 wide receiver attached to Trevor Lawrence in what should be a high-scoring, pass-heavy offense, which is really interesting. And the last time we saw him, he was the wide receiver 4 in expected points per game. He didn't have a good year, and I believe that was 2021, where he played like 6 or 7 games. But he was commanding volume. This was like a putrid Falcons offense. He was dealing with stuff on and off the field. Like, he was going through a really rough time where he was like taking time away from the team, and then he got caught like gambling on the team or whatever. But even still, in the games that he was playing, he was the wide receiver 4 in expected points per game, which is just based on your targets, your ADOT, how much volume or how many points per game should you have been putting up. He was at 17.4, which was the wide receiver 4 that year, which is really solid. If he can do something similar to that with Trevor Lawrence in this offense, he's going to crush. He was still beating men at the 87th percentile reception perception. To me, highest wide receiver or highest upside wide receiver in this range could very easily challenge for like top 10, top 5 type of numbers. Now, moving on from that, we have our next tier here, which is high-end wide receiver 2s with wide receiver 1 upsides. These are guys that you're drafting as your wide receiver 2, but I think that they do have upside to be every week wide receiver 1s for you in 2023. And when we talk about DK Metcalf, I'm kind of starting to come around on DK Metcalf. This is sort of what it comes down to with him. Where if we look at his entire career, right, let's not show the rookie year. Like, rookie year doesn't really matter for us, but he had that breakout year in 2020. And last year, the Seahawks offense was really good, right? They were 12th in pass yards per game. They were 4th in passing TDs. The issue is that DK Metcalf didn't benefit from that efficiency for some reason. Like, he just had a down year efficiency-wise, and a lot of the time we see efficiency bounce back year over year, where, again, like, DK Metcalf had the most volume of his entire career, 141 targets, yet this was his lowest fantasy point per game season since his rookie season. And it's because he had his lowest yards per reception over this 3-year span, and he had like half of the receiving touchdowns that he had in 2021, right? 12 receiving touchdowns to 6. But if he's a guy who can see this type of volume again, right, like 140 plus targets, 90 plus receptions again, and that yards per reception goes back to career average and his receiving touchdowns get into the double digits, then we're talking about a guy who finishes top 12 in points per game very easily. Now, we also have a little bit of a runway here where JSN is going to be working back from injury the first couple of weeks. You have Geno Smith maybe progressing in year 2. And even when JSN comes back in, Metcalf to me is still going to be the number 1 in this offense in a scheme that's probably going to pass more and be even more efficient in the passing game with an addition like JSN. So I actually kind of like DK Metcalf. Again, like I do understand Lockett and JSN feel like the better values, right? Where Lockett's finished higher than Metcalf each of the last 2 years. You can get him like 3 rounds later. And I do completely understand that. But if one of them was going to finish top 5 in fantasy in 2023, my money would be on DK Metcalf. I'm not sure Lockett has that same ceiling. But again, it does feel like a little bit of an overpay. But I do kind of see it with DK Metcalf. Again, if that yards per reception gets to where it needs to be, and if receiving touchdowns get to 10 plus, and then he still stacks up like 90 catches again, he's going to crush. After that, we have wide receiver 17. Not DK, I was about to say DK Metcalf, but we have Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 17. This is a guy who, like, people love to point out, like, the games of Purdy and, like, the games of McCaffrey. John Daigle has a great tweet here. Target shares in the 6 games with McCaffrey, Deebo, Kittle, Ayuk, and all of them on the field together with Brock Purdy. Deebo Samuel had a 25% target share. This is a guy now who has back-to-back seasons of over a 25% target share. Now, everyone loves to say, oh, well, Deebo Samuel's just like this like hybrid running back role. No, he can play wide receiver, man. 25% plus target share is very, very legit. If we look at his expected points per game, so EP per game, expected points, again, targets, carries, all of that. How many points per game should you be scoring? He has back-to-back years now, 15 plus, which are both top 12 marks, right? EP per game rank, both of them top 12. EP per game, 15.3. It just so happens that in 2021, he was the most efficient wide receiver in the NFL with 6.1 FPOE per game. And then last year, he was after the top 200 in efficiency, -2 FPOE per game, which is fantasy points over expected per game. So he was really struggling last year. But the volume was still there. He was still the featured wide receiver in this passing game. And if his efficiency can just bounce back, even if it just goes to his like rookie year of 2.3, or if it goes to like his second year of 0.5, he crushes his ADP this year and like is a fringe top 12 guy, which is what we're looking for. And then he also has that massive ceiling. We've already seen what the ceiling looks like. To me, Deebo Samuel's one of like the best 10 to 15 wide receivers in the NFL. He's electric, he's explosive, and he also has multiple paths to upside where he can get there in the rushing game, he can get there in the receiving game, and he can get there where he's this handcuff where if like McCaffrey or Kittle or Ayuk go down, he gets this huge boost. So to me, Deebo Samuel's been a guy I've been drafting a ton. Then we have our last wide receiver in this tier here. We have Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's such a weird one. He's coming off a season where he didn't play a full game until week 11, which is concerning. Like, that's the biggest issue with Keenan Allen. Like, I think that you can put Keenan Allen in this tier if you wanted to, in terms of just like pure projections, but the floor is a little rough. Like, this is a wide receiver who is coming off a year where, again, he didn't play a full game until week 11. He's now into year 11 in his career, which this is a really good article by Ryan Heath on Fantasy Points that we're referencing here. But he sort of mapped out fantasy performance by age, and you can see Keenan Allen's in his 11th year. That's when things start to really fall off for wide receivers. So you have that going for him. You have that he's been dealing with injuries, but he also was the wide receiver 3 in points per game from weeks 11 through 18 last year at 18.8 points per game. He could pretty easily just sleepwalk his way to a top 12 season if he stays healthy in an offense that now has Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. You have Justin Herbert, who's now finally healthy after a down year with like rib injury. Kellen Moore in Dallas had top 6 scoring offenses 3 of his 4 years there, and he had top 10 pass attempt offense 3 of his 4 years there. So you should be really excited about what this offense looks like. We want pieces of this Chargers offense, and if you want to put Keenan Allen higher, you absolutely can. Moving on, we have our wide receiver 2 tier. These are just guys who are just like in a balanced build. I draft him as my wide receiver 2, and I feel fine about. And at wide receiver 19, we have Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is really tough for me to wrestle with because his entire career, he's never finished as a top 12 point per game wide receiver, despite being, people don't understand, man, Amari Cooper coming out of school was Jamar Chase, the hype that's coming around on Marvin Harrison Jr., that was Amari Cooper. He was the prince who was promised, and he came into the NFL and never really was that guy, right? Like, we see, since 2015, the year he got drafted, he hovered around just like 20% target share, which is fine, but like 20% target share is like wide receiver 2 type numbers. I'm trying to think of like who's a comparable guy that's like a 20% target share guy. It's not this like monster ceiling upside, right? But last year he completely bucked that trend, had a 26.1% target share, which is like an alpha wide receiver target share. And if Deshaun Watson wasn't a shell of himself last year and he was his career average Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper would have been a top 12 wide receiver last year. Now, that's kind of his upside case for this year, where if Deshaun Watson is the guy who he was early on in his career, Amari Cooper probably crushes. My only downside risk there is I don't know. Again, like, this is just 1 year sample over an entire career. Could very easily go back down to like 21% target share, especially with Elijah Moore in this offense. So that's really my only concern. But even then, we're still talking about like a floor of top 24 wide receivers. So Amari Cooper at this point in the rankings, I'm completely fine with. After that, we have wide receiver 20, Drake London here. And at a certain point, you just have to bet on talent at wide receiver. Like, I do truly understand that this is a rough offense, right? Desmond Ritter's at quarterback. It's going to be run first as well. But Drake London is a guy where if he was on the Jets or the Saints, he would be here or he would be here. If he was on the Jets or the Saints, he'd be on either of those. He is just as good talent-wise as Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. That's not up for debate. I have a year 2 point per game projection model that's actually like we worked on in the Dynasty offseason, but it takes into account a prospect's prospect grade, my prospect grade, which is like that prospect tier, legendary, elite, gold, silver, bronze, silver, bronze. And it takes into account your year 1 PFF receiving grade, your year 1 points per game, your year 1 yards per out run, your targets, your routes, all of that. Pretty much just takes into account your prospect profile and what you did in year 1, and it spits out a year 2 point per game projection. And Drake London gets spit out somewhere between Garrett Wilson, Devonta Smith, CeeDee Lamb, Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins. It's a good place to be in. And we look at where he sort of ranks between all of them. He has, I believe that's going to be the 3rd highest PFF grade among all of them, Points per game wasn't there, but yards per out run was over 2, and targets per out run is the highest on this list. That's a guy I want to bet on. Like, again, this is a really, really good player that we're getting pretty much a 2-round discount on because of his offense. Again, I get the offense, but elite wide receiver prospect, top 10 pick in the NFL draft, elite peripherals. I like him to be a featured guy in this offense this year. I'll take the discount on him. This was an offense last year that had the 5th lowest pass attempts per game since 2000. Historically low volume pass offense. That's going to bounce back. If they go from historically low to even just like bottom 10 in pass attempts, that's good enough for Drake London to produce. And at worst, Desmond Ridder should be a slight upgrade for Marcus Mariota. So I do like betting on the year 2 breakout with Drake London. And it's kind of the same thing with our next wide receiver, where this is also from that Ryan Heath article where he outlined the biggest breakout wide receiver years are year 2 and year 3. So we're betting on Drake London because of that. And then we're also betting on Christian Watson because of that. Christian Watson coming in as our wide receiver 21. And similar idea, right? Talented wide receiver heading into year 2. We want those profiles. And if we just look at the games where Christian Watson played over 60% of the snaps, now I know that the red arrows pointed out Amon-Ra St. Brown, but he tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Christian Watson right ahead of him there. 18.8 points per game, or 18.6, 18.6 points per game, which is just absolutely insane for a rookie wide receiver to come in here and do that in year 1. Like it reminds me a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown getting hot down the stretch in his rookie year and then smashing in year 2. Now, I don't love Jordan Love or kind of what this offense looks like, but I kind of just have to bet on the talent here. This was a guy who, again, wide receiver 7 in points per game in games with 60% or more of the snaps. He was the wide receiver 12 in targets per out run last year. He was the wide receiver 13 in yards per out run. Anytime he's in the 5th, 6th round, I am taking Christian Watson every single time. Now, I will say, he is going in like the 4th round on Underdog. Make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy. It's the best way to prepare for your home league drafts, where the ADP is the sharpest ever. There's real money on the line. Everyone's 18 plus, everyone's 21 plus. So a guy like Christian Watson's going in the 4th round. Drake London's going in the 4th round. I can tell you from firsthand experience, in these home leagues, they are more 5th, 6th round picks. And when you just hop on Underdog, you use promo code RON, which will get you a deposit matched up to $100. You'll find the link in the description, comment section down below. Click it, it'll take you there to use promo code RON. And if you just hop into these drafts, you get kind of conditioned for where players go. You'll see, oh, Drake London's never available here. And you go into your home league draft, and it's like, Drake London's available at the 5'11", or Christian Watson's available at the 6'02". That's a smash pick every single time. So it's just a great way to kind of condition yourself to how a draft room should look and feel. And you take that to your home league, and you absolutely crush. You can just get some practice in, like $3, $5 drafts. Make sure you check it out. Again, promo code RON gets you a deposit matched up to $100. But moving on from that, we have DJ Moore. DJ Moore, last guy in this tier, who I'm sort of comfortable with as my wide receiver 2 at this point. He earns volume. He's talented. He's been top 12 in target share each of the last 2 years here, DJ Moore. And he's in a Chicago offense that, yes, is going to be a low-volume pass offense, but I like betting on the Bears' passing offense to improve, sort of like Jalen Hurts in the Eagles' offense last year, like Josh Allen and the Bills' offense when they got Stephon Diggs. I like that. It feels very similar. You get DJ Moore. Justin Fields should get carried along one more year here. He's a super skilled, super talented wide receiver. I'm not saying it's for certain that this Bears offense will be better than expected, but there's at least upside here, right? If this was like some veteran that, career, like if this was, I don't know, like Jimmy Garoppolo in this offense, right? You're not going to project Jimmy Garoppolo to get any better, but you can project the upside case where Justin Fields is an amazing passer. And in that scenario, DJ Moore and his big target share in a good passing offense elevated by Justin Fields will crush in fantasy in 2023. Now, moving on from that, we have our borderline wide receiver 2s here. First up, our wide receiver 23, DeAndre Hopkins. Now, similar concern that we had with Keenan Allen. He's also heading into his year 11 year. Again, we see a really big drop-off there. And this is a guy I just don't feel good about. I prefer him as like my wide receiver 3, and even then, I don't love it. Again, year 11, tough, dangerous territory for wide receivers and their production cliffs. He just posted his 2 lowest yards per out run season since 2016. He's on this downward trajectory. He's on a Titans team that's been dead last in pass attempts over the last 3 years. Like if you just take pass attempts per game since 2020, yeah, we're talking bottom in pass attempts. This is the 32nd ranked offensive line unit on Establish the Run. It was a dumpster fire last year. Even if he has a huge target share, it's just like he has this huge market share of like what's going to be a pretty bad offense in general. You have the downside of like if this team starts 1-7, then they probably throw Will Levis or Malik Willis in there over Ryan Tannehill. Like it's just it's really tough for me to buy in on DeAndre Hopkins last year. I know it's a really lazy take, but it does feel a lot like when Julio Jones went there and was just like a disastrous 4th-round pick. If D-Hop gets there in the 5th, fine, I'll take him, but he is someone I'm not drafting a ton of. At wide receiver 24, we do have Mike Williams, who is sort of like fancy Gabe Davis. He's this, downfield jump ball specialist, but that's fine in this offense. He's been the wide receiver 20, the wide receiver 13 in points per game the last 2 years. And when we look at Justin Herbert's stats, he's going to bounce back this year. He was dealing with a rib injury last year. He had his lowest ever yards per attempt year. He had his lowest passing touchdown year. Those should bounce back. Mike Williams should be a huge beneficiary of that. And again, we're bullish on this offense and Kellen Moore. We just want pieces of this Chargers offense. So Mike Williams, to me, tough to have him outside of your top 24 guys. He's a guy who has been a wide receiver 2 the last 2 years. After that, we have wide receiver 25, Deontay Johnson, who, again, is someone that we're really sort of pushing up our board this time of year. He leads the ESPN open score since he was drafted. Open score is just ESPN has tracking data, and they sort of figure out how much cushion and separation wide receivers get. Since Deontay Johnson was drafted, he leads the NFL, and that's a star-studded list. Behind him is Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas. Now, Garrett Wilson's also there, Calvin Ridley, other guys higher on this list, but Deontay Johnson gets open, and he gets open at a high rate, and he commands targets, man. He has like a 27% plus target share each of the last 2 years, and he was a big bust last year, but that was just because he had like this, like a crazy enigma of a year. We have never seen somebody have over 140 targets and no touchdowns in a given year. I'm not going to like hold that against him. It truly happens to the best of us. Again, he had 30 more targets than the next guy on this list in terms of like highest target seasons without a touchdown. There's some wiggle room here that Kenny Pickett improves. And in this AFC North with like the Bengals, who of course are pass heavy, Ravens who are trying to be pass heavy now, and then the Browns who are sort of starting to becoming pass heavy, where shootouts could happen, high scoring games could happen, and the Steelers offense could kind of surprise people in 2023. At wide receiver 26, we have Brandon Ayuk here, who has been top 24 in points per game each of his in 2 of his first 3 seasons. The only time he wasn't a top 24 guy was like week 2. I was looking at Winnie back there. She was making noises. But week 2 when, or not week 2, but year 2, where he was just like in the doghouse and like relegated to punt returner behind like Jawan Jennings or whatever. Since then, he's been amazing. He is a special talent. It's really just a matter of the scheme that he's in the role that he plays. But in terms of reception perception, he crushed it. 91st percentile against man, like 89th percentile against press coverage. And Matt Harmon said this offense still functions at its best when the true X wide receiver can win on his own against man and press coverage, is consistently doing that at a high level. And Ayuk lined up 81.3% of his sampled snaps on the line. He is that guy. So he's this X wide receiver. He plays on the line. He's good against press, good against man. He's a very talented wide receiver, and he combines that as well with special yards after catch ability, where he was 4th among all wide receivers in missed tackles forced last year. So he's this X wide receiver, wins downfield, and then also has this yak ability, which is really fun. The only issue is the pecking order in this offense, right? There's a lot of guys here in, again, the 6 games with McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle, Ayuk, and Purdy. Ayuk was at 16.1% target share. Now, that's a small sample size. He probably flirts with like 20%, but it is tough. Like, talent-wise to me, I mean, you can make the case for Deontay Johnson too, but talent-wise to me, Ayuk is somebody that you could make a case to be like in here or even like here if you wanted to, but just given this is an offense that has been bottom 10 in pass attempts per game over the last 3 years, and Brock Purdy was just one of 4 QBs last year with 8 or more yards per attempt, which was Jalen Hurts, Tua, and Mahomes. He probably regresses a bit. So it's tough. Like the case for Ayuk to have like a top 5 finish, he probably needs an injury in front of him, which is like a little bit tough to get, wrap your head around. But wide receiver 27, moving on to Tyler Lockett. He does nothing but finish as a wide receiver 2 every single year. And the Seahawks last year were great. They were a top 10 scoring offense last year in their first year with Geno Smith. They should only get better here. And even though JSN's here, JSN's going to have some ramp-up time with this wrist injury. And even then, teams run 3 wide receiver sets a ton. It's really not a big deal. They're going to, if anything, they're going to pass more. They're going to be more efficient as a passing offense with somebody like JSN to take things and sort of press the defense up, right? Because he's going to be taking a lot of the underneath stuff. And it should open the down the field area for Tyler Lockett, which is really exciting. And Lockett's also never been a target hog. Like he was 26 in target share last year, and he was really good, but that was the lowest mark for him since 2018. So he's going to hover around 20% target share, finish as a wide receiver 2, be just fine. He's finished as a top 24 wide receiver each of the last 5 seasons. We can get him around wide receiver 30 this year. To me, he's kind of a no-brainer. And I don't really see any signs of him slowing down. Like, this was his reception perception blurb, where Matt Harmon said Lockett's been a stud performer in our reception perception his entire NFL tenure, but you can make an argument 2022 was his best season. 78.9% success rate versus man coverage, not only falls at the 95th percentile, also the best score of his career. He was also fantastic at beating zone coverage with an 83.4% success rate, the second highest mark of his career. So he was balling out last year. So he's over 30, but he's showing no signs of slowing down. And at that price, I have no problem grabbing Lockett as like a really nice high floor wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type of guy. Then we have our last wide receiver in this tier, Chris Godwin at wide receiver 28. And he's tough for me because I do think that Godwin's talented, but he also might be a smidge overrated, where he has like a career average of 1.97 yards per run, which is good. Like anything around 2 yards per run is good for a career average. He's been a top 15 point per game wide receiver each of his last 4 years. And we're now getting him around like wide receiver 30, which is good. The issue is that he's had Tom Brady for the last 3 years, and then he had Jameis Winston when he threw 30 touchdowns. And over that entire span since 2019, the Bucs have been the only team in the NFL with 40 or more pass attempts per game. And now he goes from that to Baker Mayfield to Kyle Trask, and his best target share over the last 4 years has been 22.2%, which is the wide receiver 24 that year. So he's never been a guy, like he's almost like an Amari Cooper, where he's been hovering around like a 20 to 22% target share, which are like wide receiver 2 numbers in good offenses. So when you sort of take that and you get the efficiency downside of Baker and Kyle Trask, it's really hard for me to wrestle with where to put Godwin, because I don't think that he has upside to absolutely crush, but he might be a pretty good bet just to finish as a wide receiver 2, like in PPR leagues, catch the ball a ton. But again, like it is tough. I don't know how much this offense is going to be able to move the ball. The pass attempts are going to go way down from where they are. So it's just a matter of sort of weighing how far you want to move down Chris Godwin because of that. Now moving on to our last tier, we have wide receiver 29 here, Christian Kirk. And these are your high-end wide receiver 3s and flex plays. I'm not stoked to draft any of these guys, but you draft them and they're just sort of, in the mix. Guys, when we're talking about like drafting wide receivers through your flex +1, like they're probably either flex or +1, something in that area. And with Christian Kirk, he was wide receiver 18 in points per game last year. So wide receiver 29 here sounds pretty crazy, but they add Calvin Ridley, so he's definitely behind Calvin Ridley in terms of targets. Now, we also have the development that he is splitting 2 wide receiver sets with Zay Jones, which is not good. A guy like Christian Kirk, you need him on the field at all times, because now the Jaguars, this is a Nathan Jonke article on PFF, but the Jaguars played their starters in the first preseason game in which Jones took both snaps in 12 personnel instead of Kirk. 12 personnel is 2 wide receiver sets. Jacksonville used the starting offense more extensively in this game, giving us a better picture of how snaps instead of 11 personnel will be distributed. Jags took 9 snaps out of 12 personnel, with Jones and Kirk each seeing 4 snaps, so they kind of split it there. Jones ended up with 3 more snaps because he played both snaps. The Jaguars ran out of 13 personnel. And Kirk took, I think, 13 personnel. It might be 1 wide receiver, 3 tight ends, but I could be wrong there. And Kirk 1 snap out of one snap off out of 11 personnel, with Jamal Agnew replacing him. Yeah, so it's just like, it's not the end of the world, right? But teams run 2 wide receiver sets or like less than 3 wide receiver sets like 20 to 30% of the time. So you get a guy who's going to be out there in all situations, and you take that back to like a 70 to 80% route participation. And the upside is tough. Like, he's now just like a high floor wide receiver 3, which like aren't priorities for me. I think that he's probably going to be fine, but in terms of him being like a smash league winner, it gets tough. And in this range, when we have like rookie wide receivers like Jordan Addison and the guys we listed before him, or I don't know, the upside in this range like isn't a ton, but it's just like, why draft Christian Kirk in like the 5th round in a lot of places when I could just wait and get like a Jordan Addison later on, or a JSN, or a lot of these higher upside guys to me that I think could crush in fantasy. But our last wide receiver here is wide receiver 30, Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin has always been a borderline wide receiver 2. He's finished anywhere from wide receiver 20 to wide receiver 30 in points per game each of his 4 years in the NFL at this point now. But he did pick up a turf toe injury. Like, without the turf toe injury, he's probably in this range, like probably high end this range. But we'll move him down a tier. He does have a turf toe injury, but it doesn't seem to be a huge issue. This is, again, Deepak Chona. Lean towards playing week 1, low re-injury risk. Machine learning predicts 10% performance hit initially. So that's like, not a huge deal, but it is something, right? He could re-aggravate it. He couldn't get re-injured. You never want to draft a player on day 1 that's dealing with an injury, but it seems like it's not a big deal. So we move him down a tier, and that's about it. He should be fine in this offense. Sam Howell at quarterback at least has some upside to be good. Eric Bieniemy should be able to run a little bit of a better offense of what he's been in. And Terry McLaurin should, again, finish anywhere from wide receiver 20 to wide receiver 30 in points per game and be like just fine for fantasy. But that's going to do it for us today. That is the complete thing. I'll just leave this on the screen in case you guys want to look at it. But our complete top 30 there in 45 minutes. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Again, if you want the entire rankings cheat sheet, top 200, it's all updated for the Terry McLaurin injuries, the JSN injuries, the Judy stuff, the Josh Jacobs coming back to the Raiders. And when the Jonathan Taylor news drops, we'll update it as well. So if you have a home league draft coming up, make sure you check it out, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. And if not, it's all good. Just leave a like, subscribe. It helps me out a ton. It helps the channel out a ton. And I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm